911, what is your emergency?
911. I woke up on my boyfriend here. He was outside this morning. He was cold. He was just drinking. He's cold. I found him outside. The kitchen's a bloody mess. He's not breathing.
Why is the kitchen a bloody mess? Hello?
I don't know. I need paramedics.
All right, stand in line. I'm going to connect you to fire rescue, okay?
One, two, three, four.
Southwest County Fire Rescue. What's the address of the emergency? And tell me what's wrong.
He is non-responsive.
October 18th, 2019. A frantic 911 call from Riverview, Florida shattered the quiet morning. Melissa Turner, her voice trembling with panic. But by the time first responders arrived, Matthew was already gone. At first, it seemed like a tragic accident, but the autopsy revealed something far more chilling. Matthew hadn't drowned.
Matthew Trussler was found in the patio pool area of this residence.
And what kind of shape was Melissa at that time?
I remember seeing her pretty well covered in blood.
He had been stabbed. Detectives now had a homicide on their hands, and Melissa's story wasn't adding up. Then came the breakthrough. A neighbor's security camera picked up audio from that night. Confronted with the evidence, Melissa admitted to stabbing Matthew, but swore it was self-defense. She said he had tried to choke her, and stabbing him was her only chance to survive. But was it? The evidence pointed to something darker. Was this a desperate act of survival or a calculated crime? This was not an ordinary love story. The day Matthew Trussler died started like any other, at least according to Melissa Turner. She said it began with the usual routine in their Tampa suburb home, taking care of their pets, tidying up, and running errands together. By the evening, they were back at the house, sharing drinks like they often did. Drinking, according to Melissa, was just a part of their normal life. Matthew enjoyed it, and that evening was no exception. Melissa said she grew tired around 11 p.m. She didn't feel like heading upstairs to bed, so she chose to sleep on a large chair in her office downstairs. Matthew stayed up, and she assumed he was still enjoying himself when she drifted off. What Melissa claimed she woke up to the next morning, though, was nothing short of confusing.
I saw the kitchen was... I didn't see him outside at first. I went upstairs and I checked the bedroom, and then I came back down again.
It was around 8:30 a.m. when she found him. Matthew was on the ground, unresponsive. She said she panicked and immediately tried to help him. She checked if he was breathing, and when he wasn't, she started CPR. Blood covered her hands and clothes as she desperately tried to save him. By the time the paramedics arrived, Matthew was already gone, and the scene had shifted from one of panic to one of suspicion. Melissa's tone was also eerily casual during parts of her discussion with investigators. She spoke about the previous day like it was just another day in their lives. Chores, groceries, drinks. Nothing about her story suggested anything unusual, at least at first. But investigators weren't convinced everything added up. When they pointed out the blood on her, Melissa said it was from her attempts to save him. She didn't seem to understand why it was strange or why they kept pressing her about the details. She said finding Matthew like that didn't make sense to her either. From her perspective, she woke up to an ordinary morning and walked into a nightmare. But the detectives knew this wasn't just an unfortunate accident. Blood, a disheveled kitchen, and a timeline that didn't seem to add up were already painting a different picture. What exactly had happened during those hours between the evening drinks and the morning discovery? That question would drive the case forward as investigators dug deeper into the events of that night. A couple of hours after Melissa Turner's frantic 911 call, investigators sat her down to figure out what happened that night. She was still wearing the same blood-soaked clothes from earlier, but there was something unusual: latex gloves. An officer at the scene had given them to her because she was covered in Matthew's blood, and everything she touched left a mark. She left the gloves on, saying it didn't feel real to her, almost like she was detached from the moment.
You put those on because
I
of the
was
amount of
getting
blood.
things bloody because I was covered in his blood.
Do you want to keep wearing those gloves, or do you want to take them off?
I'll leave them on for now.
Do you have any injuries on your person?
No,
Any scratches or cuts or anything?
none that I noticed.
Then, as they took photographs of her hands, there was a small cut on her palm. She explained it might have happened from grabbing broken glass earlier that morning. She said she hadn't realized it was there, but the detectives didn't seem convinced. Meanwhile, back at home, Matthew's family was beginning to learn the devastating news. His brother Sean got the call from their mother and was told it had been an accident. The shock hit Sean like a wave. He broke down, calling his fiancée, unable to process what had happened. Matthew, or Matty as Sean called him, wasn't just his brother. He was someone Sean had guided through life, someone he worked alongside in the construction business. The brothers had been close. Matthew had moved to Florida to start fresh and build a better life. He struggled with substance abuse, but Sean believed in him. Matthew worked hard, had a big heart, and always seemed to want to do better. Sean described him as a good kid with a lot of love to give, even if he didn't always have things figured out. 2 years after moving, Matthew met Melissa on Tinder. She was drawn to him immediately, saying he treated her differently than anyone else had. They started dating, and by 2019, they had taken the next big step, buying a house together. But it didn't take long for cracks to appear in the relationship. Melissa described how Matthew's drinking started to spiral. What began as casual turned into excessive, and the tension in their home grew. Still, she claimed their night leading up to his death had been fine. She told investigators they had no arguments and that he was never violent toward her. She insisted they were just drinking and having a good time, but the detectives knew there was more. A responding officer had mentioned Melissa hinted at an argument the night before.
What were you and Matthew arguing about last night?
I don't really remember. I mean, we might have gotten in an argument, but it didn't seem like anything more like screaming at each other that I know of.
You told us that you guys were there, there's only two of you, the two of you were drinking. My problem is I got Matthew on the back porch with stab wounds.
Stab wounds?
Melissa's reaction was one of disbelief, as though the words hadn't sunk in. She didn't offer an explanation, just shock. But the detectives weren't stopping there. They knew the answers they were looking for were somewhere in the details, and they weren't going to let this case slip away. While investigators were questioning Melissa Turner about her version of events, another detective, Ryan Lagasse, was combing through the neighborhood for leads. As he knocked on doors, he spotted a security camera mounted on a neighbor's garage, facing Melissa and Matthew's home. What that camera recorded would change the course of the investigation. The footage didn't show much visually. It was mostly darkness, but the audio it captured told a far more chilling story. Around 4 a.m., the quiet of the neighborhood was broken by crashing noises and shouting. The male voice was hard to make out, but the female voice, it was loud and angry.
911, what is your emergency?
I woke up on my boyfriend. He was outside this morning. He's cold. He's gone.
I was scared and I was confused. I was on the phone with 911.
The kitchen's a bloody mess. He's not breathing.
Why is the kitchen a bloody mess?
I don't know.
What's your name?
No. Melissa Turner.
The detective listening to this knew he had to act fast. Back at the station, Melissa was adamant that nothing unusual had happened the night before. But when detectives brought up the audio evidence, her story began to shift. At first, Melissa claimed she had no memory of being awake at 4 a.m. She seemed surprised when they mentioned yelling and screaming. But when pressed, she admitted there had been an argument. According to her, Matthew had woken her up, drunk and stumbling, and they got into a fight. She said the yelling was just her frustration at him for falling over, but the detectives weren't buying it. And then there was the cut on Melissa's hand. She initially blamed broken glass from earlier that morning, but the detectives pointed out that the injury didn't look like it came from glass. Her story shifted again. She said Matthew sometimes got his knives out when he drank, and that the cut came from trying to grab one out of his hand during their argument. Detectives felt they were closing in on the truth. They knew something violent had occurred during those early morning hours. The yelling, the crashing noises, and now the injury on Melissa's hand were pieces of a puzzle that painted a dark picture. By the end of the day, just hours after Melissa's frantic 911 call, authorities arrested her for second-degree murder. Melissa's claims of self-defense continued, but the evidence stacked against her raised more questions than answers. What had really happened during those 4 hours? Was her story of Matthew being out of control the truth, or was this an attempt to shift the blame? Either way, the events of that night had left Matthew dead and Melissa facing the fight of her life. By this point, Sean Tressler and his fiancée Jennifer were trying to make sense of what happened to Matthew. From their perspective, Matthew's life with Melissa Turner had two distinct sides. To outsiders, Melissa seemed like a regular partner, living a domestic life with Matthew. But she also had a different persona as a cosplay model and adult content creator, crafting an image that was worlds away from the quiet Florida suburb where they lived. Sean felt that Melissa had isolated Matthew, pulling him away from family and friends. The brothers had grown distant in the last 6 months of Matthew's life. Sean hadn't seen him during that time. He believed Melissa had driven a wedge between them, a rift that started when Matthew stopped working with Sean at his construction business. For Sean, it felt like Melissa had taken Matthew away long before his tragic death. Melissa's creative career had started years before she met Matthew. She had studied makeup effects and gained popularity through a fitness blog, sharing her transformation after losing a significant amount of weight. Over time, that blog evolved. She began producing racier content, first as a side gig and then as her main source of income. Melissa had built a business performing for online audiences, and her success quickly became her focus. Her former boyfriend Cameron described how Melissa's personality began to change as her business grew. She became more driven, obsessed with success and the money it brought in. As her career flourished, Cameron noticed her temper flare up more often. Her outbursts were unpredictable, and her drive to success left little room for anything else. Melissa had carved out her space in the adult entertainment world, and when she met Matthew on Tinder, Sean and Jennifer believed she saw him as the perfect partner for her work. Melissa and Matthew moved quickly in their relationship, but Sean and Jennifer suspected that behind the scenes, Matthew was growing tired of the life Melissa had pulled him into. At first, it seemed like a lucrative partnership. He appeared in her videos, and the money was good, but the pressure and stress, Sean believed, started to take a toll. Jennifer thought Matthew wanted out. She speculated that the adult entertainment work had gone from tolerable to unbearable for him, and she suspected that might have led to the argument the night he died. Sean believed Matthew had reached a breaking point and was ready to walk away from Melissa and her business. But Melissa painted a different picture. She insisted that things began to unravel because Matthew's drinking escalated. On the night he died, she claimed, his behavior had grown darker and more intense after she said she wanted to go to bed. While Sean and Jennifer suspected an argument about their future sparked Melissa's rage, Melissa said it was Matthew's own actions that led to the tragic events of that night.
Was there any arguing?
At 4 o'clock, not that I know of. I believe I was asleep. I have no memory of any argument at 4 in the morning.
Melissa told investigators the events of October 18, 2019 were the result of a night gone horribly wrong. According to her, Matthew woke her up early that morning, still intoxicated from hours of drinking. She said she was angry, frustrated that he hadn't gone to bed. Their argument quickly escalated, and she claimed Matthew had pulled out a black tactical switchblade. It wasn't the first time, she said. He had a habit of taking out knives when he was upset, sometimes even threatening to hurt himself. She insisted she tried to take the knife away from him, but he wouldn't let go. Melissa described the struggle as chaotic. She claimed Matthew grabbed her by the neck and squeezed, leaving her convinced she was going to die. In her panic, she managed to wrestle the knife away and stabbed him in the back, just once, she said, to make him stop. But the situation didn't end there. She said Matthew pushed her against the kitchen counter, causing her to hit her head. Dazed and overwhelmed, she blacked out. Her attorney described her as the real victim in a toxic relationship, one that had spiraled out of control. He painted a picture of escalating behavior from Matthew, fueled by his drinking and emotional instability. But the prosecution wasn't convinced. They argued Melissa's story was filled with inconsistencies and that she had changed her account several times since her initial interrogation. Most notably, she hadn't mentioned being strangled until much later, right before the trial. The prosecution had evidence that directly challenged Melissa's version of events. Audio from a neighbor's security camera captured her voice shouting in anger that night, not fear. And then there was the footage from inside the couple's home. Initially overlooked due to a time zone error, the ADT video showed Matthew calmly walking through the house while Melissa followed him, hunched over and visibly angry. In court, Melissa testified in her own defense. She described Matthew as a troubled man, someone who struggled with alcoholism and self-destructive tendencies. She said he had moments where he seemed to lose touch with reality, even talking about demons he thought were in the room. She recounted times when he had hurt himself and lashed out in frightening ways. Her attorney argued these moments of instability justified her actions that night. He claimed she acted in self-defense, fearing for her life. But the prosecution wasn't swayed. They pointed to Matthew's lack of a violent history and argued that Melissa's anger, not fear, drove her actions.
You believe that Melissa killed Matthew Trussler?
I think she was intoxicated, and I do think that she went far beyond anything she thought she would do. Maybe she was just so frustrated with his drinking that she harms him so badly that he ends up dying.
The medical examiner's report revealed that Matthew's fatal wound wasn't the stab to his back, but a deep cut on his arm, which punctured a vein.
You stabbed him in the back, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
The only thing that I did was the back.
How did he get cut on his right arm?
I couldn't tell you that. I have no clue. He could have fallen into something. He could have done it himself. I stabbed him once to get him off of me from strangling me.
Why didn't you tell the police that he had been trying to strangle you?
Because I couldn't remember at the time.
But the prosecution argued otherwise, stating the evidence pointed to Melissa as the aggressor. As the trial unfolded, the jury had to weigh Melissa's testimony against the evidence. The videos, the audio recordings, and the inconsistencies in her story painted a picture that was hard to reconcile with her claim of self-defense. It wasn't just about what happened, it was about what the evidence revealed and what it left unanswered. The events of that night were laid bare in court, and the jury had a monumental task to decide whether Melissa's actions were a desperate act of survival or a fatal loss of control. The ADT camera footage became a central piece of the case, unraveling the events of that early October morning. At 3:42 a.m., Matthew Trussler walked calmly past the camera, unarmed, while Melissa Turner followed closely behind, hunched over and visibly angry. The tension in those few seconds was undeniable. By 4:01 a.m., the footage showed Melissa running from the direction of the kitchen, her expression distressed. It was around this time that a neighbor's security camera picked up chilling audio from the house, yelling, screaming, and words that cut through the night. At 4:08 a.m., the ADT footage showed Melissa standing by the front door, appearing to talk to herself. Prosecutors highlighted the red mark on her hand visible in the footage, which they said was from when she stabbed Matthew. They pointed out that by this time, Matthew was seriously injured, bleeding from wounds that would prove fatal. Instead of calling for help, prosecutors claimed she returned to where Matthew was, escalating the situation further. By 5:11 a.m., the confrontation seemed to come to an end. Matthew somehow made it to the pool area, pushing out a window screen to escape. Prosecutors believed he was desperate to get away from Melissa. His trail of blood from the kitchen to the patio told a grim story. Matthew collapsed by the pool, critically injured and in need of help, but help never came. Melissa, on the other hand, claimed she blacked out around this time. She said she didn't remember anything until much later that morning, yet the ADT camera captured her walking out of her office at 8:35 a.m., her hair disheveled as if she had just woken up. To her defense, this was evidence that she didn't know Matthew was dying. To the prosecution, it was proof she had seen the extent of his injuries and chose not to act. In court, Melissa testified, recounting her version of events. She described Matthew's drinking and erratic behavior, claiming he often scared her with his actions. She said he had spoken in strange voices, even referencing demons. But the prosecution argued her tears on the stand seemed rehearsed, not genuine. They pointed to the neighbor's audio recording, where Melissa's anger was clear. The jury weighed all the evidence, the videos, the audio, and Melissa's inconsistent statements. On March 18, 2022, she was sentenced to 20.5 years in prison. The judge acknowledged the jury's decision and Melissa's responsibility in Matthew's death, but spared her a life sentence. As the courtroom door closed, Melissa Turner's fate was sealed, and Matthew Trussler's family sought closure for the life that was cut too short. The events of that October night left one life lost and another irrevocably altered. Matthew Trussler's story is a stark reminder of how quickly love can turn into tragedy when anger, substance abuse, and unresolved tension take hold. The evidence, the audio recordings, video footage, and Melissa's inconsistent accounts painted a picture of a relationship on the brink, culminating in a night of chaos and irreversible choices. Melissa's 20.5-year sentence provides a measure of justice, but it cannot bring Matthew back. His family will always mourn the vibrant, hard-working man they knew, while Melissa faces the consequences of a single night that spiraled beyond control. For all who hear this story, it's a sobering reminder of the importance of seeking help before conflicts turn deadly.